after being reborn, I finally stopped pestering the grand tutor of the court, Li Yunan. He disliked my constant chattering and said I didn't act like a princess, so I remained silent in front of him, quiet as a wooden puppet. He claimed that my persistent clinging tarnished his pristine reputation and dragged his noble name through the mud of gossip, so I asked my father to assign me a different tutor for my studies. He also said that my actions caused misunderstandings with the one he truly loved, driving a wedge between them, so I kept my distance at all times and publicly declared that I no longer had feelings for him. Finally, he said that as a princess, I was spoiled and selfish, never having a sense of righteousness in my heart, and unaware of the suffering of the common people, so I volunteered to marry into the enemy country, securing decades of peace between the two nations, in this life. Every choice I made was the opposite of my previous life, because in my past life, I persisted relentlessly and finally succeeded in having my father arrange my marriage to Li Yunan. As a result, a few days after we were married, Li Yunan's beloved, the fifth princess, took her own life. Upon hearing the news, Li Yunan showed no emotion. Instead, he grew closer to me, only to bribe the midwife on the day I gave birth. He watched as I struggled through a day and night of difficult labor, ultimately dying in agony, a tragic death of both mother and child. Given a second chance, I have no other thoughts but to survive. Later, I went to a neighboring country for a political marriage. Together with the new emperor of that country, I returned to visit my homeland. Our loving relationship as husband and wife became the envy of all. Li Yunan stopped our carriage, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "Princess, I regret it, Your Highness the third princess. The Grand Tutor has given orders not to allow you inside." The gatekeeper's voice echoed in my ears. I was momentarily dazed, then overwhelmed with joy. Today is the flower appreciation party hosted by the Grand Tutor Li Yunan at his residence. Many high-ranking officials and nobles have come to attend, but I alone have been turned away at the door. Yet at this moment, I feel no shame at all. On the contrary, I am overjoyed, all because I have been reborn, no matter who you ask. Everyone believes I am unworthy of Li Yunan. After all, he became the Grand Tutor at such a young age, and not only is he exceptionally handsome, but his talent is also deeply admired. As for me, I am merely a princess born to a low-ranking consort. My birth mother passed away long ago, and my status in the palace is neither high nor low. In fact, I am even less regarded than the head maid serving a favored imperial consort, because of a drunken promise made by my father, the emperor, who mistakenly referred to the fifth princess as the third princess. Li Yunan became my teacher, responsible for instructing me in my daily studies. Everyone could see that Li Yunan was quite displeased about this, but he dared not defy the emperor's wishes. As a result, he could only vent his frustration on me. To this, the emperor turned a blind eye. He couldn't possibly admit his mistake, and after all, I was just an unfavored princess. Suffering a little injustice was of no consequence. For example, today, this flower viewing party invited all the princes and princesses, yet I alone was not allowed to enter. In my previous life, I waited outside the door for a long time, until the moon rose above the willow trees, and only then did I return to the palace in despair. As a result, I fell seriously ill upon returning and nearly lost my life. A political rival used this incident to their advantage, submitting a memorial against Li Yunan, which led to him being severely reprimanded by the emperor. This was then used as a pretext to arrange a marriage between me and him, as a way to warn him. To my surprise, just a few days after I married Li Yunan, the fifth princess drank poisoned wine and took her own life. Upon hearing the news, Li Yunan merely gave an indifferent hymn before continuing our wedding night. After marriage, he treated me extremely well, which made me feel somewhat overwhelmed by his favor. I thought I had finally moved him, but to my surprise, on the day I gave birth, Li Yunan bribed the midwife to make my delivery difficult. I struggled in agony for a full day and night before finally breathing my last. He stood by the window, watching my distorted features with a cold gaze. "If it weren't for you, how could you be so heartbroken as to take her own life? Go down and apologize to her." But after I died, the fifth princess, Qin Yu, returned. She hadn't died at all. Instead, She had taken a fake death potion to escape the palace and avoid the political marriage with the neighboring country. Li Yunan, who had always claimed to be selfless, did everything in his power to cover up for her. He twisted the story of her feigned death to escape, making it seem as though I was the one who had tried to kill her, and that she had narrowly survived. In the end, I was the only one who ended up dead. Fortunately, heaven has eyes, giving me a second chance. I must live well this time and stay far away from Li Yunan. Amid the crowd's malicious and mocking gazes, I turned and left without hesitation, boarding the carriage to return to the palace. After returning to my residence, I poured myself a cup of tea and let out a long sigh. For the past 3 years, my feelings for Li Yunan have been known to everyone, without exception. Even though I may not be the most favored, I am still a princess after all. Yet I willingly rolled up my sleeves to cook for Li Yunan, personally making the pastries he enjoys. Li Yunan once mentioned his admiration for the calligraphy and paintings of the renowned artist Huang Qi. I went to great lengths to search everywhere for them, even making multiple visits to plead with the owners of the artworks, and finally managed to acquire an authentic piece as a birthday gift for him. Once, he disagreed with his father on a political matter, and in a fit of anger, his father punished him with 20 lashes. I knelt beside him, pleading desperately, and ended up taking the punishment for him, leaving me battered and bruised. Li Yunan once mentioned that he liked the peach blossom grove in the southern part of the city. During the season when the peach blossoms were in full bloom, I joyfully invited him to visit with me. He agreed, but on the day of our outing, he brought along the 5th princess, Qin Yu. The two of them walked hand in hand, thoroughly enjoying themselves. However, because Li Yunan asked me to break off a peach blossom branch, I was bitten by a poisonous insect and nearly lost my life. Recalling every single event of the past, I feel as though I had lost my mind, recklessly clinging to Li Yunan even at the risk of my own life. Now, all I want is to live, and the first thing I must do is stay away from Li Yunan. The next day, I didn't go to find Li Yunan, but he came to me on his own, cornering me in the imperial garden. Qin Sheng, you asked His Majesty to release me from being your teacher. He didn't call me princess according to the rules for the first time, which shows how furious he was. I was somewhat confused and said directly, "What's wrong? Grand Tutor Li never wanted to teach me in the first place. Everything started because my father misspoke while drunk. And now we're just correcting that mistake." Li Yunan's breathing became rapid. He stared at me intently and, after a long pause, suddenly sneered, "Is your highness trying to manipulate me this way? Playing hard to get? As a princess of our dynasty, you have no concern for the nation or its people. Yet you spend your days learning the dirty tricks of the inner chambers. You truly are like mud that cannot be helped up the wall." My heart has long been numb, so upon hearing this, I felt no sadness at all. Instead, I calmly retorted, "When I asked you to be my teacher, you thought I was pestering you. Now that I no longer want you to be my teacher, you say I'm playing hard to get." Li Yunan, Grand Tutor Li, may I ask what it would take to satisfy you? Just then, Qin Yu walked over and said in a coquettish tone, "Third sister, you can't blame Yunan for this. You've done so many absurd things just to pester him before, so it's only natural for him to have doubts." Li Yunan had already started to waver under my questioning, but upon hearing this, his gaze toward me instantly turned several degrees colder. Watching this scene, my heart felt bitter. Ever since 3 years ago, when Qin Yu, the princess who had been living in exile, was found and brought back from the common folk by our father, Li Yunan gradually became completely captivated by her. In an attempt to regain his attention, I tearfully declared that I would ignore him from then on and proceeded to give him the cold shoulder for half a month. As a result, during the subsequent royal hunt, my horse suddenly spooked for some reason and charged straight toward Qin Yu, causing her to fall seriously ill from the fright. No matter how much I tried to explain, no one believed me. From that point on, Li Yunan's attitude toward me shifted from indifference to outright disgust, to the point where he couldn't even stand the sight of me. All the other noble ladies in the capital who were close to Qin Yu, as well as my royal brothers, all joined in ostracizing and isolating me. I sighed softly and looked at Li Yunan, saying, "It was all my fault in the past. I shouldn't have pestered you." And from now on, I never will again. I'm not playing hard to get. I truly want to set things right and return you to my fifth sister, however. Li Yunan's eyes were filled with mockery and distrust. He simply didn't believe that I would genuinely stop pestering him. Qin Yu stepped forward, affectionately taking my hand as she said gently, "Yunan, you should believe me. I can see she truly knows she was wrong, sister. My birthday banquet is in a few days. Won't you come and join the fun? After all, there aren't many people in the capital willing to speak with you." I refused expressionlessly. "I'd rather not spoil your fun." But Qin Yu persisted, not letting go of my hand. "Sister, please come and celebrate my birthday with me. I'm really looking forward to you." Before she could finish her words, she suddenly staggered a few steps to the side and abruptly fell into the pond. It looked as if she had been pushed out with great force. Li Yunan quickly reached out and grabbed her, preventing any mishap. Qin Yu weakly leaned into Li Yunan's arms, looking at me with wide, astonished eyes. "Sister, why would you do this? I was only kindly inviting you." Before I could speak, Li Yunan angrily exclaimed, "Qin Sheng, how can you be so vicious? Au is your own sister." With that, he slapped me hard across the face, and my cheek immediately swelled up. "Au often speaks highly of you in front of me, but now it seems you are nothing but an irredeemable, poisonous woman. If you dare use those underhanded tricks from the inner chambers on Au again, even if you are a princess, I will not let you off." I was knocked to the ground by that slap, and as I listened to the roar in my ears, I felt dazed. After a long while, I murmured, "I'll stay out of your way from now on. Don't worry, I'll never appear in front of you again." Li Yunan said coldly, "That would be best." With that, he supported Qin Yu, and the two of them walked away together, like a perfect match made in heaven. I touched my swollen cheek and smiled bitterly. The memories that had been sealed away suddenly resurfaced in my mind. In the past, Li Yunan actually treated me quite well. Back then, I was only 12 years old. Because my mother had passed away early, I was bullied by the palace maids. It was Li Yunan who happened to pass by, sternly stopped those maids, and informed my father about my situation. That was how I came into my father's sight and was able to have enough to eat and wear warm clothes from then on. From then on, I regarded him as my benefactor and always followed him around. He, in turn, was very gentle with me, often bringing me snacks and trinkets from outside the palace to make me happy. I returned to my own courtyard with a swollen, red face, but no one dared to ask what happened along the way. The palace maids and eunuchs were skilled at judging people's status and knew better than to offend Li Yunan and Qin Yu, so they pretended not to see anything. After that, I hid in my own residence for several days, counting the days. I realized it was about time for the envoy from the neighboring country to come and propose marriage, so I finally made my way to my father's study. Upon seeing my father, I paid my respects and immediately said, "I am willing to go for the marriage alliance." Hearing this, my father was taken aback. "But the person from the neighboring country seeking marriage is the new emperor who once served as a hostage in our court. He must hold a grudge against our people. If you go, your life may not be easy," I said calmly. "Father, as a princess of this dynasty, it is my duty to sacrifice for the nation and its people. If my life can bring peace between the two countries, I am willing." My father's gaze was complex, but then he smiled and said, "Truly my daughter, very well. I shall bestow upon you the title of Princess Yongan and arrange a grand wedding for you." As I left the imperial study, I ran into Li Yunan. Upon seeing me, his first words were, "Your Highness, the third princess, where have you been all these days?" I said calmly, "Didn't I say before that I would avoid you and no longer appear in front of you?" Li Yunan sneered, "When have your words ever come true? Don't forget how you used to pester me relentlessly. If you truly want to turn over a new leaf, you should go far away." "As far as the ends of the earth." I stared at him, and after a moment, I slowly said, "Fine, I promise you." The next day, in front of all the civil and military officials, the emperor declared me the Princess of Yongan and arranged for me to marry the new emperor of the neighboring country to foster peace. The procession set out that very day, grandly passing through the city gates and heading toward the distant capital of the neighboring kingdom. As I sat in the jolting carriage, We had only traveled a short distance when I faintly heard shouts coming from behind. A guard outside the carriage said, "Your Highness, it seems Grand Tutor Li is catching up. Should we stop, Li Yunan? What is he chasing after me for? Is it to warn me to behave myself in the future?" I frowned and said calmly, "Don't stop, keep going. He's just an insignificant person." But the next moment, the carriage shook, and Li Yunan pulled open the carriage curtain. Staring at me intently with a somewhat gritted teeth expression, "An insignificant person, Qin Sheng, I'm afraid you've forgotten how you used to chase after me before." He reached out to grab my wrist, but I shrank back into the carriage and said coldly, "Grand Tutor Li, please show some restraint. I am now a princess on my way to marry into a neighboring kingdom. Your behavior is entirely improper." Li Yunan gritted his teeth and said, "His Majesty said you volunteered to marry into the neighboring kingdom. Who made you do this?" I replied calmly, "Didn't Grand Tutor Li tell me to get as far away as possible, preferably to the ends of the earth? Now I am truly leaving, even beyond the borders of Qin. You should be pleased." Li Yunan met my icy gaze and was left momentarily speechless by my retort. He suddenly realized that I truly intended to leave him, to hide far away, never to see him again in this lifetime. Yet, he was unwilling to admit this fact, and even more unwilling to acknowledge that I no longer cared for him. A moment later, he spoke with barely contained anger, "Come back with me right now. I will plead with His Majesty to send someone else for the marriage alliance. Isn't this just your way of playing hard to get? State affairs are not a game, you." Before he could finish his sentence, I could no longer hold back and raised my hand to slap him. "Enough, Li Yunan. Is that all you have in your mind? Let me tell you, even though I may have chased after you when I was young, I no longer have feelings for you. As the Grand Tutor of the court, have you ever considered the people of both nations? All you talk about is romance. You truly disappoint me, Princess. If you still remember your position, then get back to your duties as Grand Tutor and serve the country faithfully, instead of causing a scene here and stirring conflict between our nations." Li Yunan, you always used to lecture me with rules and the greater good of the family and nation. How laughable that I only see it now. You are clearly a hypocrite who says one thing and does another, a selfish and petty man. I didn't lower my voice. After shouting these words, I felt both physically and mentally refreshed. In my past life, I endured so much grievance from him and Qin Yu, was unjustly rebuked and humiliated countless times, yet I never dared to speak up. Now, I've finally given it back to them. They only know how to pick on me, saying I'm not good here or there, but are they themselves flawless saints? The force of that slap was not light. Li Yunan's face was swollen on one side, his hair disheveled, and he looked utterly disheveled. He stared at me in disbelief, his lips moving but unable to speak. I raised my head and looked at the guard by the carriage. Due to the strong wind outside, the guard was wearing a mask. But his posture alone appeared tall and reliable. "Please pull him away, let's not delay the journey," the guard responded, reaching out to pull Li Yunan, but he clung desperately to the carriage door, his eyes red as he stared at me. In his gaze, there was both anger and hatred, along with an indescribable emotion. I didn't look at him again and said lightly, "Among the Qin Kingdom's eligible princesses, aside from me, there is only the recently found 5th Princess Qin Yu. If I don't go for the marriage alliance, this duty will undoubtedly fall to her." As soon as the words were spoken, Li Yunan completely lost his strength and was forcibly dragged away by the guard, unceremoniously pushed to the side of the road. The carriage gradually moved farther away, leaving him behind. I just felt a sense of irony in my heart. I thought he had chased after me for some reason, but as soon as he heard that Qin Yu might be sent away for a political marriage, he immediately fell silent. He clearly likes Qin Yu, so why is he chasing after me now? What is he really thinking? Forget it, none of this has anything to do with me anymore. Let him do as he pleases. The journey was extremely dull. The soldiers and maids in the entourage didn't dare to speak to me, and only the guard stationed outside would chat with me to pass the time. I listened to his voice and found it somewhat familiar, yet I couldn't quite recall where I had heard it before, so I asked, "This, sir, have we met before?" The guard laughed and said, "Your Highness flatters me. How could someone like me have had the honor of meeting you?" I still had my doubts, but seeing that he seemed reluctant to speak further, I decided not to press the matter. The carriage had been traveling for over half a month, and I was utterly exhausted, unable to hold back any longer. I asked, "How much longer until we reach the capital of you?" The guard outside replied, "Your Highness, we still have about 2 hours left." I felt slightly relieved and lay down on the soft couch inside the carriage, intending to take a short nap. I don't know how much time had passed when the carriage suddenly jolted to a stop. Dazed, I sat up, only to see the curtain being pulled aside as a hand reached inside. The voice of the guard sounded in my ear. "Princess, we have arrived." I hesitated for a moment, grabbed his wrist, and stepped down from the carriage. Outside, a crowd of people were already kneeling on the ground, their shouts deafening. "Welcome back to the palace, Your Majesty, Your Majesty." I froze. Is that the newly enthroned emperor? Why didn't I see him? I've heard the new emperor is moody and tyrannical. His harem remains empty because no one dares to send their daughters here to die. I wonder how long I, as a princess, will survive. I just hope he won't take out the anger from his time as a hostage in the Qin state on me, so I can live a few more years. Thinking this, I looked around for the new emperor but found only myself and the guard standing nearby. How dare this guard be so bold as to not kneel? I looked at him, and he looked at me. After a long moment, he suddenly laughed. The guard removed the mask from his face, revealing an extraordinarily handsome, almost bewitching face, and looked at me with a beaming smile. This face was far too recognizable. I recognized it at a glance and was utterly shocked, exclaiming without thinking, "Little Qingzi." As soon as these words were spoken, all those kneeling trembled with fear, as if I had committed some unforgivable offense, terrified that disaster would befall them. But Xiao Qingzi, standing before me, merely smiled, then waved his hand to dismiss everyone and took me back to the palace. When I was young, I was not favored in the palace and lived no differently from a palace maid, with anyone able to step on me, and Xiao Qingzi was a young eunuch I was familiar with. We had spent several years together, enduring many difficult times. It was just that when I was 12, Xiao Qingzi inexplicably disappeared. I searched for a long time but couldn't find him, and I thought he had died, which made me sad for a long time. I wasn't so foolish as to be utterly clueless. And I immediately realized, "You are the hostage sent from you to our court." Yu Qing seemed quite pleased, showing not a hint of the cruelty he was rumored to have. He said, "Yes, it's me. Back then, I hid my identity to avoid your hostility. Shengsheng, I heard you volunteered to come for the marriage alliance. I'm very pleased. I thought the only person you liked was Li Yunan." I couldn't help but fall silent. In my past life, the only person I truly liked was indeed Li Yunan. Everyone knew I spent all my time chasing after him. I was practically his #1 admirer. Perhaps Yu Qing knew this very well, which is why he never suggested that I come for the marriage alliance. After all, even if he had proposed it, I would have likely resisted desperately or ended up resenting him if I were forced to come here. I couldn't help but ask, what if I hadn't proposed the marriage alliance myself? Yu Qing was in the middle of removing the intricate hairpins from my head. At my words, she paused briefly, then smiled as if nothing was amiss. If two nations wish to coexist peacefully, a marriage alliance is always necessary. This has been the way since ancient times, there's no avoiding it. But if it weren't you, then anyone would do. Shengsheng, if you truly like Li Yunan, I am willing to step aside for you. Even if it were another princess who came, I would treat her well and would never harm her life. I shook my head. I stopped liking Li Yunan long ago. He is nothing but a beast who can't tell right from wrong. Hearing me say this, Yu Qing seemed pleased. He smiled with his eyes, but said, "Is that so? If you still can't forget him, I could." I quickly covered his mouth and complained, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so determined to have me find someone else? Since I chose to marry for the sake of peace between our two countries, I won't regret it. Li Yunan and I have long since cut ties completely." But he seemed displeased. His tone strange. Just for the peace between the two countries. I was taken aback for a moment before realizing what he meant, and quickly shook my head. "No, Arching, if I had known the new emperor of you was you, I would have been even more eager to come." Yu Qing was finally satisfied and gently held my hand. Sheng Sheng, I'm sorry for making you wait so long. Back then, I was too young to have a choice. When I returned to my country, I didn't even have the chance to say goodbye to you. I understand everything. At that time, like me, he was living under someone else's roof, with no control over his own life or death. When he left, he might have been thrown directly into a carriage without anyone informing him. How could he have come to say goodbye to me? I had thought that coming to you would be a living hell, but unexpectedly, it turned into a reunion with an old friend, a sudden turn from darkness to light. Half a month later, you held the coronation ceremony for the Empress, and I became Yu Qing's queen. The Emperor and Empress were deeply in love after their marriage, treating each other with the utmost respect, and the rumors of the new Emperor's cruelty and tyranny were dispelled without a fight. Thus, those high-ranking officials and nobles began to scheme again, wanting to send their own daughters into the harem to compete for favor and share in the benefits. But before I could say anything, Yu Qing was the first to object. In front of all the civil and military officials, he threw the memorial suggesting he expand his harem onto the ground and sneered, "My heart belongs only to the Empress. If you wish to send your daughters into the palace, you may do so, but for every one that comes, I will have one killed. Moreover, I have no interest in those women. If you truly wish to control the harem, why not send your sons instead?" At these words, the ministers fell completely silent. Yu Qing was no longer the restrained hostage prince he once was. Now, with centralized power in the Yu Kingdom, the authority over life and death rested solely in his hands, and no one dared to oppose him, and those ministers would never send their sons into the harem. In their eyes, sons are meant to inherit the family legacy. How could they possibly become the emperor's consorts? The matter was eventually dropped. After returning to the palace, I helped Yu Qing remove his outer robe and teased him, saying, "What if someone actually got the idea to send their unloved illegitimate son to you as a consort? What would you do then?" Yu Qing pinched my cheek and replied nonchalantly, "If they really sent him in, we'd have him castrated and keep him by the Empress's side as a little eunuch." I laughed and said, "Shouldn't he be my male consort instead?" Yu Qing wasn't angry either, but leaned against me instead. "That won't do. The Empress only needs one male favorite, me. Ever since I came to the Yu Kingdom, Yu Qing has spoiled me beyond measure. Unlike Li Yunan, he would immediately present any precious thing to me as soon as he got it, and having been reborn, I didn't lose myself or become arrogant because of his favor. Instead, I became even more grateful, and our bond grew deeper. Another year passed, and for my father's 50th birthday, Yu Qing personally took me back to the Qin Kingdom to celebrate his longevity banquet. This year, the exchanges between the two countries have been frequent, the people are stable and increasingly prosperous, and even my father's mood has improved a lot, with a smile that never leaves his face. As for Li Yunan, he was sitting in a more distant position, and throughout the banquet, he kept staring at me. I wanted to ignore it but couldn't, and due to my status and etiquette, I had to pretend not to notice. He seemed to be in a very poor state, looking somewhat haggard, with a hint of madness in his eyes. Most importantly, the fifth Princess Qin Yu was not by his side. What's going on? I wondered in my heart. Could it be that Qin Yu had still run into trouble? But I had already married into the Yu Kingdom and had long since stopped entangling with Li Yunan. I hadn't interfered in their affairs at all. Surely this couldn't be blamed on me, could it? It was just that the weather outside was bitterly cold, and charcoal had been burned in the banquet hall. After the event, I felt a bit short of breath, so I suggested taking a walk in the Imperial Garden to get some fresh air. Yu Qing was kept behind by the Emperor to discuss some matters. He clearly wanted to accompany me but couldn't get away, so he repeatedly urged me to be extra careful. Returning after a year away and seeing the familiar scenery, I felt quite emotional. I instructed my maid to wait outside while I strolled around alone. I was about to continue forward when someone suddenly blocked my path. Li Yunan's eyes were slightly red as he stared straight at me. "Sheng Sheng, I finally get to see you again," I said calmly. "Grand Tutor Li, please mind your manners. You should address me as the Empress." Upon hearing this, his face turned pale. After a long pause, he smiled bitterly and said, "Sheng Sheng, ever since you left for the marriage alliance, I've been thinking of you day and night, reminiscing about the times we shared. How did we end up like this? I am simply stunned by his shamelessness. I took a step back and said coldly, Grand Tutor Li, you should be asking yourself that. Haven't you already married the fifth princess? Unexpectedly. A trace of disgust flashed in Li Yunan's eyes. Don't mention that vile woman. I already know everything. Back at the royal hunting grounds, she had someone drug your horse beforehand, which is why the horse charged at her. It was all part of her scheme, and she isn't even a real princess. The true fifth princess was killed by her, and she stole her tokens and identity. All these years, she has been nothing but a venomous woman occupying another's place. I was shocked. Being in the state of Yu, I had little access to news from the state of Qin, and such royal secrets would naturally not be leaked, so Qin Yu is not the fifth princess at all. The real fifth princess is already dead. No wonder she was so eager to get close to Li Yunan. She probably wanted to secure a powerful ally for herself. Li Yunan continued. When His Majesty learned of this, he was furious. However, spreading this matter would damage the royal family's reputation. So I have already declared Qin Yu deceased due to illness. He passed away from illness. I was stunned once again. The message conveyed in this passage was already very clear. After Li Yunan and Qin Yu got married, he discovered that her identity was fake, everything was a lie. Under his father's direction, he had Qin Yu killed and then announced to the public that she had passed away from illness. Just like in my previous life, making a woman quietly pass away from illness was all too simple. At this moment, I suddenly felt that the outcome of my previous life was utterly ridiculous, nothing short of a colossal joke. So this is what their so-called love amounted to. Even without my interference, they couldn't make it work. Then why did I end up like that in my previous life? Was it because I was too foolish, falling in love with a beast in human skin? From beginning to end, it was never my fault. Even without me, Qin Yu would still have died, killed by Li Yunan. This person is simply too terrifying. In his previous life, he killed me for Qin Yu, and in this life, he killed Qin Yu. Yet he still has the audacity to come back to me and ask for reconciliation. Li Yunan, however, completely failed to notice the fury in my eyes. He grabbed my wrist and said urgently, Sheng Sheng, it was all that wretched woman Qin Yu's fault. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have misunderstood you, and I certainly wouldn't have treated you that way. Now she is dead. Poisoned by my own hand, she bullied you so much in the past. Consider this my revenge for you. Sheng Sheng, I regret it. I shouldn't have let you go for a political marriage. Please come back, won't you? Only now have I realized that the one I truly love is you. Have you forgotten? That year, I saved you from the palace maid. After that, you regarded me as your savior, followed me everywhere, begged me to be your teacher, and wanted to stay with me every moment. Sheng Sheng. You like me the most, don't you? I struggled with all my might, but I was no match for his strength. I could only say angrily, Grand Tutor Li, please show some self-respect. I am the empress of you. Li Yunan seemed to have gone mad, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at me. Sheng Sheng, I'm really going crazy. I've been thinking of you every moment this past year. Only now do I realize that without you, my life has no meaning at all. I was too foolish. I didn't know how to cherish you until I lost you. Come back, let's leave the palace together and live a carefree life like wild cranes and drifting clouds. Alright, I know you like me so much. How could you be willing to become the empress of you? I said sternly. Li Yunan, I'll say it again. I stopped liking you long ago. Now, all I feel for you is disgust. You used to keep saying I didn't understand the bigger picture, that I had no concern for the nation and its people. Do you know what consequences your current actions might bring? If a conflict breaks out between the two countries, it's the common people who will suffer. But Li Yunan laughed. He gripped my wrist tightly, his voice hoarse. So what? As long as you can be by my side, that's enough. I don't believe it. How could you possibly not love me anymore? You used to love me so much. You were willing to die for me. No matter how I scolded or humiliated you, you would always come back to me. You can't do this, Sheng Sheng. You can't. You have to keep loving me. You have to only have eyes for me. How could you possibly not love me? My heart turned cold. So he actually knew all along that in the past, he had been humiliating me. Enough. calm down, people change, and the only one I love now is Yu Qing. Li Yunan, you're not even worthy of one of his fingers. What gives you the right to go crazy here? Li Yunan wanted to say something more, but suddenly someone kicked him hard, sending him flying several meters away before he could react. Yu Qing took my hand, lifted the sleeve, and gently rubbed my sore wrist, a hint of laughter in his voice. I didn't realize I was seen so favorably in the Empress's eyes. Though he said this, the look he cast at Li Yunan was piercingly cold, even more severe than the wind and snow filling the garden. I retorted irritably, is that so, when compared to a despicable scoundrel like Li Yunan? I suppose anyone would seem like an upright gentleman. Yu Qing just smiled, then stepped forward and unceremoniously gave Li Yunan a beating. After all, Li Yunan was a scholar, how could he be a match for him? He was quickly beaten to a miserable state, looking like a street vagrant. Still, he kept staring at me, muttering to himself, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, how could you possibly despise me? You clearly like me the most. Yu Qing impatiently interrupted him. Grand Tutor Li, you are truly audacious. How dare you flirt with my Empress? Do you think your life is too long? My Empress was merely young and naive before. Just because she received a little kindness from you, she regarded you as a lifesaver. Do you really think your charm is boundless? Now that I am by her side, how could she possibly take a liking to a worthless person like you? The Empress is right, you are not even worthy of comparing to a single finger of mine. How dare you try to compete with me for her? After saying this, he still felt unsatisfied. He raised his leg and stomped fiercely on Li Yuanan's face twice. He stomped the other person's face directly into the mud left by the melted snow, treating them like trash. Only then did Li Yunan realize with a shock that I was no longer the neglected princess he could bully at will, but the queen held in the palm of his hand. In the past, the third princess, no one cared what grievances she suffered. She was merely a bargaining chip in political games and a puppet to be bullied and humiliated. Even if she died, she wouldn't cause a ripple. But now, Qin Sheng is the queen of Yu Kingdom. Even the emperor of this dynasty must treat her with courtesy and dare not show any disrespect. Leaning against Yu Qing, I was no longer the timid and submissive person I used to be. Instead, I spoke calmly, Grand Tutor Li, this is likely the last time I will address you as Grand Tutor, because soon, you will no longer be fit to wear these robes. After saying this, I left with Yu Qing, leaving him alone, slumped on the ground. As we walked, Yu Qing couldn't resist trying to win my favor. He stretched out his hand for me to see and said pitifully, Your Majesty, look, my finger is scraped from hitting that scoundrel earlier. I gave him a reproachful look, took out a handkerchief, and gently wiped his face. Then I said, if that's the case, you shouldn't have started the fight in the first place. A ruler of a nation acting like a street thug, what kind of example does that set? Yu Qing was genuinely aggrieved this time. Is the Empress still concerned about that man with the surname Li? I rolled my eyes at him. What I mean is, next time, have the guards do the fighting, whether it's a group brawl or a one-on-one. Why bother doing it yourself? Even if it's just a scratch now, the one who ends up heartbroken is still me. Only then was he satisfied, and with a beaming smile, he took my hand and led me away. The next day, Yu Qing openly complained to the emperor, accusing Grand Tutor Li of attempting to offend the Queen of Yu in the imperial garden and demanding severe punishment. The emperor, already weary of Li Yunan and troubled by the lack of a reason to punish him, immediately ordered the confiscation of his property, his exile, and a lifelong ban from holding office. As Yu Qing and I boarded the carriage for our return journey, we passed the procession of exiled prisoners. Through the carriage window, I crossed paths with Li Yunan. Once a distinguished and revered Grand Tutor, he now cut a sorry figure, staggering forward as soldiers lashed him with whips. He lifted his head and seemed to catch sight of me, suddenly growing agitated, only to be kicked to the ground and beaten until he curled into a ball. I indifferently averted my gaze and leaned into Yu Qing's embrace. Looks like we'll be stuck in the carriage for quite a while again. Yu Qing toyed with my fingers and replied, if Shengshen finds it dull, why not stop and enjoy the scenery when we pass by a beautiful spot? I smiled and said, okay.